mailbox opens in broad daylight. June 5th, 2014. Inside, one white envelope. No return address. The handwriting is too careful, too measured. Inside the letter, a question: do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? The family who received this has 3 children. They've owned the house for exactly 3 days. They will never sleep there. Someone had been watching. Someone is still watching. The question investigators couldn't answer: how did a watcher know they had children before the family ever moved in? Derek Broadus stood alone in the driveway of 657 Boulevard on June 5th, 2014. The 6-bedroom Dutch colonial behind him, all 4,000 square feet of it, belonged to him now. 3 days since closing. The house where he and his wife Maria planned to raise their 3 young children. He walked to the mailbox. One envelope inside. White, business size. No return address. What happened next, according to the sworn testimony Derek would later give under oath, changed how he understood what was possible in a quiet suburb where children still played outside until dark. He opened it. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. The tone seemed almost welcoming at first. Neighbor reaching out. Then the questions started. Questions about the children. Specific questions. Which bedrooms would they use? Whether they'd play in the basement. Whether they were afraid to go down there alone. By the time Derek reached the signature, the watcher, something had shifted, not just in his understanding of the house he'd just purchased, in his understanding of what surveillance actually means. Someone had been watching this house. Someone was still watching, and they knew Derek had children. But this created an immediate problem. The closing had happened 3 days earlier. The family hadn't moved in yet. They were still living in their previous home in another New Jersey town. So, how did the watcher know they had children? How did they know the family's composition before anyone had even slept in the house? Before we go further, if cases like this interest you, real investigations where the evidence leads to questions instead of answers, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear gets more inexplicable with every documented fact. Derek called Maria. Read her portions of the letter over the phone. Her first thought, according to her later testimony, was that it had to be some kind of mistake, a bizarre prank, maybe a neighborhood tradition that had gone very wrong. But Derek kept reading. The specific references, the knowledge about their family structure, the claim that someone's family had been in charge of watching this house for generations. That same afternoon, they called the Westfield Police Department, which should have been the beginning of the investigation. Instead, it was the beginning of something else entirely. Context before the letter. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what 657 Boulevard represented. Wind through mature trees. Colonial homes set back from the street behind careful landscaping. Street parking empty in the middle of a weekday. This is Westfield, New Jersey, 25 miles west of Manhattan, where the crime rate runs well below national average, and the school system draws families willing to pay premium prices for safety and community. 657 Boulevard fit the pattern perfectly. Built in 1905, Dutch colonial architecture. The previous owners, John and Andrea Woods, had lived there for 23 years, raised their children there. By 2014, those children had grown and moved away. The Woods were empty nesters, ready to downsize. They listed the house in early 2014. Derek and Maria Broadus saw it in the spring. They'd been searching for years, something in their price range, something with enough space for 3 young children, something in the right school district. When they walked through 657 Boulevard, Maria focused on the rooms that would become bedrooms, which child would go where, how they'd arrange furniture, the kind of planning you do when you're imagining the next 15 years of your life in a place. They made an offer. The Woods accepted. Standard home inspection revealed the usual issues in a house over a century old. Some updating needed, but nothing alarming. The seller disclosure forms indicated no material problems, no disputes with neighbors, no unusual incidents. May turned to June. The closing happened on June 2nd, 2014. $1.3 million. The Woods handed over the keys. On its own, a routine real estate transaction, combined with what arrived 3 days later. It became evidence. The Broadus family still lived in their current home. They weren't moving in immediately. First, they'd renovate, update the kitchen, refinish some floors, make it theirs before bringing the children over. Derek stopped by on June 5th to take measurements, plan the renovation work, check on the property. He was alone when he opened the mailbox. Normal, unless someone had been watching for exactly that moment. Detective Leonard Lugo took the report. 20-year veteran of the Westfield PD. He'd worked everything from property crimes to domestic disturbances in a town where serious crime was rare enough to make headlines when it happened. He read the letter. The first thing that stood out: whoever wrote this had specific knowledge about the Broadus family, the number of children, the fact that they'd purchased the house. The timing, 3 days after closing. The second thing, the typewritten format. Clean, no errors. Someone had drafted this carefully. What Detective Lugo initially assumed: angry neighbor, property dispute, someone opposed to new families moving in. That assumption lasted exactly 4 days. Detective Lugo started where investigations like this always start: the immediate area. 657 Boulevard sits on a half-mile stretch of historic homes, large lots, mature landscaping that creates natural privacy barriers. The kind of street where you might wave to neighbors mowing their lawn, but not necessarily know what they do for a living. He went door to door. The houses immediately adjacent to 657 Boulevard. The houses across the street. Anyone with a direct sight line to the Broadus property. Most of the neighbors had been there for decades. Some remembered when the Woods family first moved in back in 1991. Everyone described the street as quiet, safe, the kind of place where the biggest disturbance might be a teenager's loud party or a property line dispute over a fence. Nobody admitted to writing the letter. Nobody reported seeing suspicious activity around the Broadus mailbox. But Detective Lugo noted something in his initial reports that would become significant later. Several neighbors seemed uncomfortable with the questioning. Not defensive exactly. More like they didn't want to believe this could happen on their street. One neighbor suggested it might be kids playing a prank. Another thought maybe it was someone the Broadus family knew from their previous town. Someone who'd followed them, meaning either the neighbors genuinely had no information, or someone was lying in a room full of witnesses. The handwriting on the envelope became the first forensic focus. Careful, deliberate script, almost too neat. The analysis would later show signs of potential disguise: unnatural letter formation, varied pressure, possibly written with a non-dominant hand. The postmark, Kearney, New Jersey, a working-class town about 15 miles northeast of Westfield. No obvious connection to this wealthy suburb, which created another problem. If this was a neighbor, why mail it from 15 miles away? Derek and Maria made a decision during that first week. They would not move the children into 657 Boulevard until this was resolved. They'd keep paying the mortgage on the new house. They'd keep living in their old house. But their children would not sleep in a place where someone claimed to be watching. The mortgage payment on a $1.3 million property in New Jersey, with property taxes included, runs around $8,000 monthly. They were now paying for 2 homes, and the clock was running. 13 days, June 6th through June 17th. Detective Lugo expanded the canvas. The entire length of 657 Boulevard, side streets with potential sightlines. He interviewed mail carriers. Had anyone noticed someone lingering near mailboxes, paying unusual attention to the Broadus property? Nothing. The forensic analysis of the paper, an envelope came back. Standard office supplies. 20-pound white copy paper available at literally any office supply store. Number 10 business envelope with peel and seal closure. No DNA from saliva. The typeface appeared to be Courier, common to virtually every word processor. No fingerprints on the letter or envelope, which should have indicated amateur work. Someone who'd watched crime shows and knew the basics. Except the execution was too perfect. No mistakes. No evidence. No trace. Whoever wrote this understood forensic investigation at a professional level or had researched it obsessively. Don't lick the envelope. Don't touch the paper with bare hands. Disguise your handwriting. Mail it from a different town. Derek visited 657 Boulevard periodically during those 13 days, checking on the property, meeting with contractors about the planned renovations. Each time he pulled into the driveway, he'd look at the neighboring houses, wondering which windows had a clear view, wondering who might be watching right now. On June 18th, he checked the mailbox again. Second envelope. Same careful handwriting. Same lack of return address. This one was longer, and it proved something investigators had hoped wasn't true. The second letter used that phrase for the first time. I am the watcher. It asked why the family hadn't moved in yet. Stop there. Process that question. The closing was June 2nd. First letter arrived June 5th. Second letter arrived June 18th, 16 days later. The question, why haven't you moved in yet, could only come from someone conducting active surveillance. Someone who knew the house sat empty. Someone who'd noticed Derek's sporadic visits, but observed no moving trucks, no furniture delivery, no signs of occupancy. This wasn't historical knowledge. This wasn't information from public records or neighborhood gossip. This was real-time observation. The letter mentioned seeing contractors. It described their vehicles. It commented on the renovation work beginning inside the house. The letter claimed the watcher had been watching 657 Boulevard for 20 years. It stated, 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. Then the references to the previous owners. The Woods family. The letter claimed disappointment when they left, because their children had grown up and moved away. As if the watcher had been waiting for new children to arrive. As if the broadest children were expected, requested. The questions came in a specific pattern, designed, according to later psychological analysis, to create maximum unease. Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? References to the house's history, suggestions that something had happened there, no specifics, just implication. And that's where the investigation timeline stopped making sense. Maria Broadus read this letter and had what she later described in court testimony as a breakdown. The combination of surveillance, the focus on her children, the growing financial pressure, the realization that someone out there knew details about their family. It became too much. Derek hired private security. They installed a comprehensive camera system covering every angle of 657 Boulevard, multiple cameras, motion sensors, the kind of security setup you'd normally see at a commercial property, not a suburban home. Investigators believed the cameras would solve it. Someone would approach the mailbox. Someone would be caught on video. The case would close within weeks. The cameras recorded nothing, ever. They changed their patterns. Derek varied what time he'd visit the house. He took different routes. He started paying attention to cars parked on the street, trying to memorize which vehicles belonged to which houses. The Westfield Police Department escalated the investigation. This was no longer a weird letter that might be a prank. This was sustained harassment with detailed surveillance. The Union County Prosecutor's Office got involved. Detective Lugo reached out to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit for a psychological profile. What emerged from that profile would shape the investigation for years. But it wouldn't solve the case. The profile. The FBI analyst who reviewed the letters noted several key indicators. First, obsessive fixation on a specific location. The multi-generational claim, grandfather in the 1960s, father in the 1990s, now the letter writer, suggested either an elaborate delusional system or a carefully constructed narrative designed to intimidate. Either possibility pointed towards someone with significant psychological investment in 657 Boulevard, which meant they were close, physically close, watching distance close. Second, voyeuristic elements. The focus on children and their bedrooms. The questions about where they'd sleep, where they play. This indicated either genuine paraphilic interest or tactical manipulation, knowing that threatening children creates maximum fear in parents. Third, control-seeking behavior. The letters weren't asking for money. They weren't making explicit threats. They were asserting psychological dominance. The message was clear: I'm watching. I know things about you. You cannot have privacy here. Fourth, local knowledge. Despite the Kearney postmark, the writer knew current real-time details. The contractor's arrival, the empty house. This had to be someone in the immediate area. Someone with visual access to the property. Normal, unless the writer had technology that extended their visual range beyond what investigators were considering. Fifth, sophistication. The lack of forensic evidence wasn't luck. It was planning. This was someone intelligent enough to avoid basic investigative techniques. The profile led Detective Lugo toward a specific suspect category, someone with long-term connection to the neighborhood who had developed an unhealthy attachment to 657 Boulevard. The question was, which neighbor? The answer would destroy multiple families, not just one. By summer 2014, the Broadus family had made a desperate decision. They would try to sell the house. Take whatever financial loss necessary. Just get out. They listed 657 Boulevard in July. That's when they discovered their second nightmare. Under New Jersey law, sellers must disclose material information that could affect a buyer's decision. The Watcher letters clearly qualified. Any prospective buyer needed to know an anonymous stalker claimed to be watching property. What the Broadus family believed. Full disclosure would slow the sale, but eventually someone would buy at a reduced price. What actually happened? Full disclosure made the house unsellable. The first family that showed interest made an offer. Then their attorney read the disclosure documents. The deal fell apart within 48 hours. Second family. Same pattern. Initial enthusiasm. Then the disclosure. Then withdrawal. The house was beautiful. The location was prestigious. But nobody wanted to raise children in a home where someone calling themselves the Watcher had explicitly mentioned needing young blood. The Broadus family lowered the price. $1.25 million. Already a $50,000 loss plus the money they'd spent on closing costs and initial renovations. Still no buyers. The carrying costs accumulated. $8,000 monthly for a house they'd never slept in. They were still paying their original mortgage too. The financial pressure mounted alongside the psychological stress. And then in November 2014, Derek checked the mailbox at 657 Boulevard. Third envelope. Escalation. This letter acknowledged the for sale sign. The Watcher had noticed. The Watcher was displeased, which confirmed something investigators had suspected but couldn't prove. Whoever this was, they were watching constantly, daily, maybe hourly. The tone shifted, less welcoming, more accusatory. The family was supposed to have moved in by now. Where were the children? Why was the house still empty? Then something new. The letter mentioned other neighbors by name. Specific families on 657 Boulevard, not threatening them, just weaving them into the narrative, demonstrating knowledge, implying connections. On its own, that meant nothing. Combined with the investigation's focus on immediate neighbors, it meant everything. Detective Lugo interviewed these families again. All denied involvement. Some expressed genuine concern. This was getting worse, not better. Others seemed less sympathetic. One neighbor, according to police reports, suggested the Broadus family might be overreacting. Another implied they should have handled this privately, not brought police attention to the entire street, meaning the investigation itself was creating fractures in the community. The Watcher was achieving psychological control not just over one family, but over the entire neighborhood. The investigation hit a wall. Security cameras at 657 Boulevard showed nothing unusual. No one approaching the mailbox at odd hours. No suspicious vehicles. The mail carrier had seen nothing. The handwriting analysis couldn't identify a match from the samples collected from neighbors. Detective Lugo focused on the most logical approach. Identify neighbors with the means, opportunity, and potential motive to conduct this harassment. One name kept surfacing. And that's where the case stopped being about solving a crime and started being about destroying reputations. Another neighbor had an adult child with documented mental health issues. According to sealed portions of police reports referenced in court filings, this individual had a history of unusual behavior. Nothing violent, but enough that Detective Lugo had to investigate. The interview revealed nothing. No connection to the letters. No apparent fixation on 657 Boulevard. The investigation moved on. A third neighbor had been involved in a property dispute with the Woods family years earlier. Trees along the property line. The kind of suburban disagreement that generates passive-aggressive tension, but typically doesn't escalate to stalking. The dispute had been resolved through civil mediation back in the early 2000s. Still, any historical conflict with the property made someone a potential suspect. Detective Lugo interviewed this neighbor extensively. Again, no evidence connected them to the letters, which left one possibility that investigators found deeply uncomfortable. Then investigators turned their attention to a theory that would reshape the entire case. What if the previous owners were involved? The Woods question. The logic was straightforward. The Woods family had lived at 657 Boulevard for 23 years. They claimed nothing unusual had ever happened. No strange letters. No harassment. No surveillance. But what if they were lying? What if they'd received letters from a watcher and concealed them to complete the sale? The timeline created a problem for this theory. The first letter arrived after closing, after the sale was final, after the Woods had their money. What motive would they have to start writing letters at that point? Unless, the theory went, they received letters for years, hidden them from buyers, and then when the Broadus family started asking questions, they wrote new letters to make it look like the watcher only appeared after sale. Cover the deception. Detective Lugo interviewed John and Andrea Woods multiple times. John Woods' responses, according to police reports, became increasingly defensive. He insisted nothing had happened during their ownership. He'd never heard of the watcher. He seemed frustrated by the implication that he concealed material information. The questioning continued, and then something emerged that would reshape the entire legal battle. What Abby Woods remembered. By 2015, the case had moved into civil litigation. The Broadus family sued the Woods family, alleging fraud and failure to disclose. The lawsuit sought to void the sale and recover their losses. During depositions, Abby Woods, John and Andrea's adult daughter, testified under oath. She'd grown up at 657 Boulevard, left for college, moved away, but she remembered something. In 2012 or 2013, while her parents still owned the house, a strange letter had arrived. She'd picked up the mail one day, opened an envelope addressed to the house, read it, found it weird. She couldn't remember the exact content, just that it felt odd, unsettling somehow. She threw it away, never mentioned it to her parents, didn't think it was important. Stop. Process what this means. If Abby Woods received a strange letter in 2012 or 2013, the watcher was active years before the Broadus purchase. The surveillance was ongoing long before Derek and Maria ever saw the house. The Woods family's claim that nothing unusual ever happened was either false or incomplete. But this created a new problem. This testimony created a fracture in the Woods family's defense. If a strange letter had arrived before the sale, did they have an obligation to disclose it? Even if John and Andrea themselves never saw it? The Broadus family's attorney argued this proved the watcher had been active for years. The Woods family knew, or should have known, that something unusual was happening at the property. The Woods family's attorney countered. Abby's vague memory of a single forgotten letter, never seen by the actual sellers, couldn't constitute disclosure liability, especially when the content was unclear and might have been completely unrelated to the watcher, meaning one of two things had to be true. Either Abby Woods received an early watcher letter and her parents genuinely didn't know, or the Woods family had been concealing this for years. The court would eventually have to decide which version of reality was accurate. Late 2014, The Cut, a vertical of New York Magazine, published an article. The Watcher became a headline. The piece detailed the letters, the investigation, the unsold house, the Broadus family's nightmare. It went viral. Within days, national media picked it up. CNN ran segments. The New York Times published an investigation. The Washington Post covered the legal angles. What had been a local Westfield police matter became a national obsession. Reddit communities dedicated threads to identifying the watcher. Amateur investigators analyzed public records, property histories, neighbor connections. Some conducted impressive research. Others crossed lines, naming suspects without evidence, harassing individuals based on speculation. For the Broadus family, The media attention made everything worse. Their names were now permanently attached to this case. Any Google search brought up articles about the Watcher. Their children would grow up with this as part of their family history. The attention made selling the house even more difficult. Now it wasn't local gossip. Everyone knew about 657 Boulevard. The property was famous for all the wrong reasons. And in 2016, a fourth letter arrived. 2 years later. The fourth letter commented on time passing. 2 years since the previous correspondence. The house still empty. The young blood still absent. This letter felt different. More rambling. Less structured. The tight, control prose of the earlier letters had loosened. Some forensic linguists who analyzed published excerpts noted this shift. Could indicate deteriorating mental state or possibly a different author, which meant either the Watcher was losing control or someone else had started writing letters. The letter acknowledged the media attention. It seemed aware that the Watcher case had become famous. Some analysts interpreted this as satisfaction, pride in the campaign's success. The letter ended with a statement that investigators found particularly concerning. "Welcome, my friends, welcome. Let the party begin." The phrasing raised questions. Who were the friends? Was the Watcher referring to the media coverage? To copycats inspired by the publicity? Or was this just psychological manipulation, creating the impression of multiple Watchers when it might still be one person? This would be the last letter the Broaddus family publicly acknowledged receiving. Whether other letters arrived and remained undisclosed to avoid encouraging the Watcher or protect an eventual sale remains unknown. What the forensics showed. By 2016, multiple experts had examined the letters. The analysis revealed patterns but no breakthrough. The envelope handwriting showed deliberate disguise techniques, unnatural letter formation, varied pressure, possible use of non-dominant hand. The level of sophistication suggested someone who understood how handwriting analysis worked, someone who'd thought this through, normal for a crime show enthusiast, unless they'd also managed to avoid every other forensic detection method simultaneously. The typeface, Courier, was traced to standard word processing software. No unique mechanical signatures that would indicate a specific printer, no identifying marks. The paper, 20-pound white copy paper. Generic, untraceable, no watermarks, no distinctive fibers. The envelopes, standard number 10 business size, peel and seal closure, no DNA from saliva. The postmarks varied. First letter from Kearney. Subsequent letters mailed from different New Jersey municipalities, always 10 to 15 miles from Westfield. This suggested either someone who traveled for work or someone deliberately creating a geographic pattern to mislead investigators. No fingerprints on any letter or envelope, ever. The linguistic analysis was more revealing. Consistent grammar, sophisticated vocabulary, complex sentence structure, education level estimated at college degree or higher. The writing style showed rhetorical questions and direct address, techniques designed to create intimacy and unease. One expert noted something specific. The letters never made explicit threats. They suggested, implied, created atmosphere. This made criminal prosecution complicated even if a suspect were identified. New Jersey stalking laws require a credible threat to life, safety, or property. Defense attorneys could argue the Watcher's letters, while disturbing, didn't meet that legal threshold. The psychological profile remained consistent. Obsessive tendencies, possible delusional system, need for control, local knowledge. But profiles don't solve cases. Evidence solves cases. And the evidence led nowhere. Unable to sell 657 Boulevard, the Broaddus family tried a different approach in 2016. Rent it, recoup some of the monthly carrying costs. Maybe a renter, unaware of the full history, would occupy the house and the nightmare would just end. Westfield's zoning regulations complicated this. The neighborhood wasn't zoned for rental properties. The Broaddus family had to apply to the planning board for special permission. The planning board hearings became contentious. Neighbors appeared to oppose the request. The stated objections involved transient occupancy, noise concerns, property value impacts. But underneath, a different anxiety. What would happen if renters moved in? Would the watcher escalate? Would letters become something worse? Nobody wanted to say it directly during public hearings, but the fear was present in the room. The planning board rejected the application. The Broadus family appealed. Legal fees accumulated. The battle dragged through administrative review. Eventually, they received limited permission to rent to a family with children, not a group house, not short-term rental. In 2019, 5 years after the first letter, a family rented 657 Boulevard. They were informed about the watcher. They paid substantially below market rate. They moved in. According to later reports, they received no letters. The watcher remained silent, which created the most disturbing implication yet. Whatever the goal had been, it was accomplished. The lawsuit between the Broadus family and the Woods family concluded in 2017. Judge Stanley Grossman ruled in favor of the Woods family. The court's decision acknowledged Abby Woods' testimony about a strange letter, but Judge Grossman found that John and Andrea Woods did not have actual knowledge of it. Under New Jersey law, disclosure requires actual knowledge or willful concealment. Neither was proven. The ruling acknowledged the Broadus family's suffering. But suffering doesn't establish legal liability. Without proof of wrongdoing, the Broadus family appealed. The appellate court upheld the decision. 3 years of litigation, tens of thousands in legal fees, no financial recovery. The separate lawsuit against Michael Langford and other neighbors had been dismissed earlier. The court found that suspicion, proximity, and unusual behavior were insufficient to establish civil liability. Without proof of authorship, Michael Langford's attorney issued a statement. The accusations had destroyed his family's reputation and peace. The Langford family had lived on 657 Boulevard for decades without incident. Being named as the watcher in public filings and media coverage had made them victims too, meaning either an innocent man's life was destroyed by false accusations, or a guilty man successfully used a legal system to escape consequences. The evidence couldn't determine which. The case changed the community. Tourists sometimes drove past 657 Boulevard. True crime enthusiasts wanting photographs. Reddit investigators conducting their own surveillance. Residents reported strangers asking questions, knocking on doors, requesting interviews. Property values on 657 Boulevard and surrounding streets were affected. Sellers had to address the case in disclosure documents, even for other houses. The entire street became associated with the watcher. Some neighbors remained sympathetic to the Broadus family. Others grew resentful. Their neighborhood had been stigmatized, property values impacted, privacy violated by media attention. The community debate reflected larger questions without easy answers. Should the Broadus family have stayed quiet? Did they have a responsibility to expose a potential stalker regardless of impact on neighbors? Where does individual rights end and community protection begin? The Westfield Police Department's investigation remained officially open. Detective Lugo retired in 2018. New investigators inherited the case file, but with no new letters, no new evidence, and no viable suspects, active investigation ceased. The case joined a category of unsolved files that stay open indefinitely, waiting for something to break, waiting for someone to talk, waiting for a deathbed confession or a random discovery. 10 years after the first letter, 657 Boulevard finally sold. The sale price, $959,000, nearly $350,000 less than the Broadus family paid, not accounting for a decade of carrying costs, $8,000 monthly mortgage payments, not accounting for legal fees, security systems, renovation costs, lost opportunity costs. The total financial loss exceeded $600,000. The new owners knew the history. They negotiated a substantial discount because of it. They moved in, according to public statements. They have not received any letters. The Broadus family left New Jersey. According to limited media reports, they wanted distance from Westfield, from 657 Boulevard, from the decade that the watcher consumed. Their children grew up knowing their family was the center of a national stalking case, that their parents' dream house became a nightmare before they ever slept there, that someone, somewhere, had been watching and waiting for them. The watcher achieved their goal. The Broadus family never moved in. never filled the house with young blood. But the silence that followed is the most disturbing detail of all. Because if the Watcher was real, if they were truly obsessed with 657 Boulevard for generations, they didn't just vanish. They are still there, watching the new family, watching the new children. And they made a choice. They chose to speak to Derek Broaddus. And they chose to be silent for the next owner. Which means the only thing scarier than a stalker who gets caught is one who simply decides to stop. Who is the Watcher? If you made it this far, I want to hear your analysis in the comments. Not speculation, not guesses. What piece of documented evidence stands out to you as most significant? What detail points toward a specific theory? Share this with anyone interested in real criminal psychology, unsolved investigations, or cases that demonstrate how psychological violence can be as destructive as physical violence without being provable in court. Subscribe for more investigations that respect the facts while acknowledging what we still don't understand. And if you live in Westfield, New Jersey, if you were there in 2014, if you remember something that seemed insignificant then but feels different now, the case remains open. Someone out there knows what happened at 657 Boulevard. The question is whether they'll ever tell, or whether they're still watching.